life and property has ceased to be just on the physical. It is now cyberspace. So people have life. There are people, when they don't access their emails, they are literally down. If I take your phone away for just a whole day, you look disturbed. So your life is already being affected. What about your property? People are trading vehicles. They are buying vehicles online. They are purchasing items online. In the process of all this, we can see that crimes tend to be committed. So there must be regulations that must be able to help. And so we don't do this alone. We work with the internet service providers. We are working with software developers. And we are also working with Interpol. Because these crimes on the internet are not limited by borders. They are actually crimes that span multiple jurisdictions. And so there's need for the international cooperation. So this is not looked at as a local, but looked at as at an international level. At international level, we now have the IC4, which is the Internet Crime Complaint Center, where people can complain if they are being infringed. All these social media sites, Facebook, have where they can say you can send an email for abuse. The challenge comes in with a different legislation in the different countries. You need to request mutual legal assistance, and sometimes it takes long to get that response, whereas the criminal may be running away with it. So we need to all come together to see that we defend those people who are living on the cyberspace, like you and me.
The main issue is the tendency of the governments in the East Africa wanting to control and to know exactly what are the people talking about, what are they thinking about the government, what are they plotting, because it's normal, it's government paranoia of some of these governments dictatorships. So they fear people because they don't have mandate of the people. And when you see how most of these governments came to power, it's by the power of the gun. So you don't expect to be trusting people 100%. Or governments like in Kenya, like in Uganda here also. I remember the other time the president was warning about the rumors spreading on the internet and suggesting some ways of how they can be probably regulated. You know, politicians use the word regulated, but actually they are meaning controlling. Last week also, our members of the parliament were suggesting, some of the members of the parliament were suggesting to have a mechanism of regulating how the use of the internet, to see if the internet is not abused. But even in the very advanced democracies like in the West, they also use internet surveillance and spying, which of course every government is worried about, to know actually what are the people thinking, what do they have, what are they planning, what are they plotting.
Women are generally infringed when it comes to using internet and internet freedom and being online. When we look at rural women, it's very hard for them to access internet, and when they do go online, they are restricted.
From research and so many findings, women are less educated compared to the men. Women have less access to computer gadgets. As much as we want the freedoms and all that, if the freedoms are given to, let's say, everybody, men and the women, you'll find that much as the men are able to access the internet, the women still have these limitations of literacy levels being very low. Then the men usually own the resources.
So as Woodnet, we have to come up to ensure that women are also able to go online, are also able to access various ICT tools to access the internet and get the online security, the freedom and privacy.
of the internet has become an integral part of our daily living, and so there is no way you can continue to be working on human rights and ignore the internet. The connection between the internet and human rights is access to information. When you look at the right to information as a fundamental human right, then you look at how people are able to access that information online. And so there are so many things that revolve around access to information. For one to be able to get that information out, there must be freedom of expression in the first place to allow them to put information out. And then there also must be privacy, you know. And so the right to privacy, the fact that if I put information out, it is not going to infringe on my privacy, or if I put my data online or give it to a service provider online, is not going to infringe on my privacy. Or if you look at the internet in it itself, it's a reflection of the offline life. We have freedoms of assembly, freedom of association as guaranteed in a number of international human rights instruments, as well as for us in Kenya, it's guaranteed in our constitution. Therefore, you'd want those same rights and freedoms respected offline and online.
If you are providing a weapon of instruments or a weapon of instruments for someone to commit an evil act, that act, somebody has to be liable. So usually the liability doesn't always fall straight on the internet user or the committer of the crime. The liability is usually traced down through a path, like who provided this information, what was the platform you used. So a very common example, let me give a common example, is if someone is selling weapons online, but he is selling weapons, but OLX is a very popular internet marketing service, is the platform which is using to sell these weapons. Now, as far as he is liable for selling the weapons, but OLX has to claim some blame for allowing such content to be put on their sites. In Nigeria, currently, we have the Nigeria Communications Commission, which is our regulatory body for communications. It's part of the Ministry of Communications. Due to a concern of online fraud, especially with cyber cafes, they sought to introduce a directive that every single person who is coming to a cyber cafe has to register. Now, the aim of this registration was so that cyber cafes become liable for whatsoever online frauds that any of their customers use. So once the liability comes on the cyber cafe owners, and they are just providing a service of the internet, they are not actually telling the consumers to come in and commit online fraud. Or while these are necessary, it's sometimes by raising certain infringements on the internet service providers, they seek to not go on case-by-case basis, but go on a general restriction of content, and that actually is against internet freedom.
The state of the media in Tanzania is not bad, but it is not good as well. We are facing problems in terms of legal and non-legal regimes as any other country. In terms of legal regimes, we have some laws which are very bad, affecting the media. And in terms of non-legal regimes, we have various taxes that are being tasked to the media outlets, and these, of course, curtail the freedom of the media. How do we really use the internet resource in promoting media freedom in East Africa? And it is within the media freedom that we can champion development. There is no any development without information. So it is very important that we use the internet resource very, very well, and we solve all those problems together that affect this critical resource.
What is really internet freedom, and how do we define that in respect of what we call our offline world? And how can we as Africans ensure that there is a linkage, there is actually a linkage between internet freedom and economic there is a critical aspect that actually needs to be addressed. And this addressing of this aspect is not only governments and not and organizations like CIPESA, which are not for profit. Personally, I would like to see a lot more involvement with the private sector that are for profit, because a lot of these things have a direct link to the health of a country. Most of us in the private sector can't see the link between what we do to enhance internet freedom and our commercial activities. But if you take one aspect of the whole internet freedom issue, I consider, for example, access to the internet one of the pillars of internet freedom. Telcos are saying that owners of content must pay them to be able for their customers or to access their websites. And this is an issue that is extremely contentious, not only in Africa or East Africa, it's extremely contentious worldwide. But if we look at how some of these discussions can affect African tech startups, then you start understanding why it's important for us to engage in these issues. Let's pick a small startup in Nairobi called Mathrui Resa. Mathrui Resa is a gaming company. It's a gaming app application which depicts the trends and how the public transport system in Nairobi actually operates. But what is interesting about it is that when these guys put this game together, their immediate target market was Kenya and maybe possibly East Africa. But guess what? Today that game is being downloaded in 200 countries. And some of the biggest destinations that download that game is in Asia. So if you think about that and then you bring the net neutrality issues into play, there is a huge need for private sector players to start engaging in these issues that we think are only the preserve of non-governmental organizations.